Dr. Savid Kayern had often considered himself a man of science, not circumstance, which made the current situation particularly irksome. Hanging upside down in a Zynar interrogation chamber was not how he envisioned spending his Thursday afternoon. Well, at least the blood rushing to his head made it hard to think about the rest of his problems. "You humans have such strange customs," purred the Zynar officer, a creature as appealing as a wet rat in a business suit. The Zynar's attempts at humor were as misplaced as their eyes, which seemed to float independently in its bulbous head. "Our hospitality not to your liking, Dr. Kayern," Savid smirked, the effect somewhat diminished by his blood-engorged face. "Oh, it's delightful. I especially love the upholstery. Could use a few throw pillows, though." His voice came out with a charming slur, like a man 3 drinks deep at a wedding reception. The alien hissed, its version of a laugh, a sound reminiscent of a deflating balloon. "I see why your species is considered amusing, but we're not here for amusement, Dr. Kayern. No. I thought this was an intergalactic comedy club." Savid rolled his eyes, which was less effective when gravity was trying its best to pop them out of his skull. The Zynar officer leaned closer, its breath a repugnant mix of rotting fish and despair. "We require your expertise, the cloning technology your people guard so jealously. Ah, yes, the forbidden fruit of human ingenuity. Who knew that making copies of yourself would be such a hot commodity?" Apparently, the Zynar had ideas, none of which involved peaceful coexistence or potluck dinners. Savid sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested he had better things to do, like disassembling a toaster for the fun of it. "Look, I'm flattered, really, but what you're asking for is not something I can just whip up between breakfast and lunch. It's forbidden for a reason, you know. Unleashing an army of my clones would likely cause more chaos than you could handle. And trust me, you don't want to handle that many versions of me. I'm already a handful." The officer's eyes narrowed, or maybe widened, hard to tell with those wandering peepers. "Convince us, or we might find other ways to persuade you." "Great," Savid muttered. "Torture by committee. Could we at least start with the suggestion box?" He was dropped unceremoniously onto the cold, metallic floor. The clang was as comforting as a lullaby played on an out-of-tune banjo. As he lay there, contemplating the universe, or more precisely, how to avoid getting pulverized by it, he couldn't help but chuckle. "What's so funny, human?" The Zynar stood over him, casting a shadow that smelt of ominous intentions. Savid grinned, flashing teeth that were more grit than gleam. "Just thinking about my last job review. Said I'd never go anywhere." He shrugged, still sprawled on the floor like an unwilling yoga practitioner. "Guess they were wrong. Now I'm everywhere, even in orbit around a planet I can't pronounce." The Zynar's patience, thin as a spider's thread, finally snapped. "Do not test us, Dr. Kayern. This facility is not without its charms, but they can become quite unpleasant." He chuckled, a dark noise that could have been mistaken for a death rattle. "I've worked with interns." "You don't scare me." The alien left, probably to find a bigger stick or maybe just to clear its nostrils. Savid dragged himself up, shaking off the cold like a wet dog. He'd need his wits about him if he was going to get through this. He took a moment to examine his surroundings. The chamber was minimalist, in the sense that one chair and a tray of ominous-looking tools could be called Daker. The walls were lined with screens displaying all manner of Zynar propaganda, like a nightmare version of a Times Square jumbotron. Savid picked up a tool from the tray, examining it with the bemused expression of a man who'd just been handed a spork at a 5-star restaurant. "Wonder what this one's for. Brain scraping or just a friendly flesh probe?" He tossed it aside, letting it clatter noisily to the floor, breaking the oppressive silence. Silence was dangerous. It let thoughts creep in, and those thoughts were never pleasant. His mind drifted back to Earth, to the lab where he'd spent years tinkering with genes and sipping bad coffee. The place where he'd made his mark on the world, one clone at a time, always with the warning label, "Do not use for evil." And yet here he was, facing the inevitable consequence of hubris wrapped in good intentions. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself that panic wasn't part of the plan, not that he had much of a plan beyond staying alive long enough to come up with a better plan. The irony wasn't lost on him. The door slid open with a hiss, and in stepped another Zynar, this one smaller and with a face like a melted candle. It greeted him with a nod, less menacing than the last one, but only marginally. "Dr. Kayern," it said in a voice that sounded like a broken synthesizer. "I am here to assist with your compliance." Compliance. That's a polite way to say coercion, Savid quipped, examining the creature's inscrutable expression. The Zynar frowned, or maybe it was smiling. "We prefer harmony, Dr. Kayern. Cooperation is beneficial. For you, maybe. For me, it sounds like a one-way ticket to Regretville." Savid crossed his arms, defiance etched into every line of his body. The alien moved closer, its gaze curious, like a scientist studying a particularly interesting mold. You must understand your technology could end a great conflict, bring peace to the galaxy. Savid snorted, the sound echoing off the sterile walls. Oh sure, peace through overwhelming force. Classic strategy. Worked so well for everyone else who tried it. The Xynar's eyes didn't waver. Our leaders ask only for your cooperation. Surely you see the logic in preventing further bloodshed. Logic. The problem with logic is it doesn't account for human stubbornness, or humor. He smiled, a flash of teeth that was more challenge than charm. There was a pause, a moment suspended in tension so thick you could cut it with a laser scalpel. Savid could almost hear the gears turning in the creature's head. I will return, it said finally, its voice carrying a promise of inevitability. Consider your options, Dr. Kyron. Considering is my favorite pastime, he replied, matching its tone with mock sincerity, right after not getting blown out an airlock. As the door closed once more, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the oppressive silence, Savid allowed himself a moment of reflection. There was a way out of every situation. He just had to find it before he became an unwilling footnote in the annals of interstellar conflict. He glanced at the tool he discarded earlier, now lying innocuously on the floor. It wasn't much, but in the right hands, anything could be a weapon or a solution. All right, Savid, he muttered to himself, the way one might talk to a foolhardy friend about to do something stupid. Time to put that genius to work. He picked up the tool, feeling its weight in his hand, imagining the possibilities. It wasn't a plan, not yet, but it was a start. And in this grim, cynical galaxy, a start was sometimes all you got. With a resigned sigh, he got to work, the seed of an idea taking root in his mind. He had no illusions about the odds stacked against him, but then again, if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was surviving against impossible odds. As the hours ticked by, the walls seemed to close in, but his resolve only grew stronger. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could almost hear the clinking of glasses in a distant bar, the raucous laughter of friends who believed in him, even if they were halfway across the galaxy. Who knows, maybe they'd have something to toast to sooner than he thought. After all, he still had a few tricks up his sleeve, and if anyone could pull off a miracle in this hellhole, it was Dr. Savid Kyron, Dr. Savid Kyron sat in his upside-down prison, contemplating the fine line between innovation and idiocy. Figured he'd spent more time hanging like an awkward bat than he had standing upright lately. Maybe he should add professional yoga master to his resume, right next to genius geneticist and unpaid intern wrangler. The room wasn't much to look at: 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor designed to bounce sound around like a sadistic echo chamber. But there was potential here, the way there's potential in a rusty nail if you're desperate enough. He had the Xynar's interrogation chamber figured out, all sharp angles and dull threats, but now his interest needed to wander. His head still buzzed from the recent blood rush, but clarity was creeping back in, bringing with it the familiar hum of ideas. He stood up or down, depending on your perspective, and brushed himself off. The room's atmosphere was thick with that special brand of desperation only found in shared misery. It was time to explore his new home away from home, find its cracks, its crevices, the kind of spots an enterprising mind could exploit. The walls hummed with the dull throb of some alien machinery, a constant reminder of captivity. Not exactly home sweet home, he muttered, running a hand against the cold surface, feeling for anything that might indicate weakness. The paneling vibrated slightly under his touch. Now there's a good sign, he said to himself, noting a faint line where the panel didn't quite meet the wall. Maybe his captors weren't as competent as they wanted him to believe, or maybe they just underestimated how much free time a desperate human could have. He found a narrow lip, just enough to wedge his fingers into. It wasn't much, but then again, neither was he. With a grunt that suggested he was either straining or auditioning for a horror movie, Savid pulled the panel. To his surprise, it shifted slightly, creaking as though the hinges had never been intended to be used. "Would you look at that?" he whispered, more out of a need for conversation than anything else. He had no intention of being the guest star in a Xynar game of Guess Who's Missing. The gap he created was small, just enough to peek through, but it was a start. On the other side, he spotted a network of cables and conduits that zigzagged like a drunken spider's web. "Looks like the Xynar went for the everything and the kitchen sink approach to building," he noted dryly. Good for them. His little discovery was a comforting reminder that no prison was perfect. Even an alien tower of terror had its limits. Still, it was one thing to find a flaw and another to exploit it without getting his face rearranged by the Xynar locals. Progress was progress, even if it was slow enough to make a snail look like a speedster. Time to test another theory. He had noted the rhythmic blinking of a tiny light embedded within the wall, like a heartbeat. Curious instinct kicked in, and he tapped around the panel, feeling the slight vibrations that could very well mask a frequency. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this blinking light than decoration. He remembered an old trick from his university days, a simple frequency hack he'd used to commandeer the audio systems of lecture halls. Funny how such trivial knowledge turned useful when facing extraterrestrial incarceration. "Let's see if anyone's home," he murmured, fiddling with the blinking light, adjusting it with the patience of a man threading a needle during an earthquake. Static erupted in his ear, a sound as welcome as a tickle of flames in an ice storm, but beneath it something else, a voice. "This is Savid Kyrn," he said, his voice steady. "If anyone's picking this up, I suggest you answer. I promise I'm infinitely more charming than our captors." There was a pause, then a crackle. "Dr. Kyrn, is that you?" The voice was tentative, like a timid knock on a door long closed. Savid grinned, more relieved than he would admit. "In the flesh, or what's left of it. Who am I speaking to?" "Lieutenant Farah Reeve. I'm in another sector." "Pretty sure we're the only two humans left not on their way to the dissecting table. Nice to meet you under the circumstances." "A pleasure, Lieutenant," Savid replied, the title rolling off his tongue with all the sarcasm he could muster. "I was just saying to myself how much I missed human company. It's been me and Mr. Ratsuit for far too long." There was a pause, then a soft, almost reluctant chuckle. "Glad to hear someone retains their sense of humor. We're in a bit of a predicament, aren't we?" "You could say that," he agreed, "but I've always believed in the power of two desperate minds over one. Tell me, Lieutenant, are you any good at improvising?" "I was a communications officer. Improvisation is practically in the job description." Savid's grin widened. "That's the spirit." "I've found a promising flaw in our charming host's design. Maybe we can turn it to our advantage." "Glad to hear someone has a plan," she replied, her tone shifting to something more resolute. "I've been mapping the layout from here. It's not much, but I'm getting a feel for their systems. They're surprisingly lax on security protocols." "Well," Savid said, "never underestimate the ability of bureaucracy to dull even alien senses." They spent the next hour exchanging notes, theories, and half-formed plans. Savid found himself buoyed by the familiar exchange of ideas, the spark of collaboration. Even facing overwhelming odds, the human spirit, or at least human stubbornness, wasn't so easily extinguished. "We'll need more than two of us," Farah said. "There are others, not many but enough. We've been trying to establish contact, but this is the first real breakthrough." Savid nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Then let's make it count. Get the word out. The more minds, the better." "I'll get to work," she promised. "Stay safe, Dr. Kyrn. You too, Lieutenant, and call me Savid." As the connection cut, leaving him with the whisper of static in the symphony of silence, Savid felt a flicker of hope. A flicker was often all it took to ignite a firestorm. He turned back to the panel, ideas forming faster than the Zynar could extinguish them. It was time to turn this prison into something more, a beacon of resistance. It wouldn't be easy, but then that was all part of the fun. If nothing else, it was a chance to prove his last job review wrong in the most spectacular fashion possible, and he wasn't about to pass that up. He worked with determination, his hands moving with a deftness that belied his grim circumstances. He'd need to find a way to amplify the frequency, expand the reach of their clandestine network. There were more prisoners out there, more potential allies. It was a race against time, and he intended to win. The next few hours were a blur of makeshift wiring and whispered coordination. Farah's voice became a constant companion, her updates and insights a lifeline in the oppressive solitude. They spoke in low tones, careful to avoid detection, each conversation a step closer to something resembling a plan. "There's a weakness in their communication relays," Farah explained. "I've been able to tap into a few secondary channels. It's not much, but it gives us a window." "That's all we need," Savid replied. "A window is just a door in disguise." "Is it?" she asked, amusement coloring her voice. "Sure it is," he insisted. "You just need the right battering ram." It wasn't long before they began reaching others, each new connection a small victory in the war against despair. Savid felt something stir in him, a long-dormant sense of purpose reawakening. It was a feeling he hadn't embraced since the early days of his research, before ethics and red tape strangled innovation. With every new voice that joined their network, the semblance of a plan began to take shape. They shared knowledge, resources, and hope, creating a tapestry of resistance from the threads of their collective will. "We've got a team," Farah announced after a particularly fruitful session. "We're still outnumbered, but our numbers are growing." "Quality over quantity," Savid replied. "We make do with what we have. What's the next move?" Savid leaned back, considering the question. The Zynar were complacent, their arrogance a chink in the armor. It was time to exploit it, to turn their own systems against them. He could almost taste the irony. "We start by shutting down their surveillance," he decided. "Blind them, if only for a moment. It'll buy us time and give us room to maneuver." "I can work with that," Farah agreed. "I'll coordinate with the others. We can make it happen." Savid felt a thrill of anticipation, a heady cocktail of fear and excitement. "Then let's not keep our hosts waiting." As plans solidified and hope kindled anew, he couldn't help but marvel at the audacity of human nature, its capacity to adapt, to endure, and to fight back against the odds. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their element, but they were not out of the fight. Not yet, not by a long shot. With each passing Ior, the oppressive weight of captivity seemed to lessen, replaced by the growing rhythm of rebellion. Savid felt it in the air, in the whispered exchanges and covert glances. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a catalyst, a spark in the darkness, and it was only a matter of time before the fire spread. The Xynar wouldn't know what hit them. And when the time came, they would learn firsthand just how dangerous a cornered human could be. Dr. Savid Kyrn was starting to feel like the protagonist of a discount spy novel, only without the budget for a decent tuxedo or a suave demeanor. He was still upside down, still locked in the Xynar interrogation chamber, and still pretending not to notice the smell of rat suit every time the Xynar officer slinked in to check on him. The Xynar had started to get twitchy. You'd think a species that resembled a wet rodent in business attire would be used to a certain level of discomfort, but apparently Dr. Kyrn's brand of human tenacity was getting under their skin, or fur, as it were. The humming of the walls seemed more ominous now, the throbbing of alien machinery, a constant reminder that the stakes were climbing quicker than Savid's blood pressure. His latest trick with the blinking light and frequency hack hadn't gone unnoticed, and the Xynar weren't the forgiving sort. The room felt hotter, the air thicker, as if the very atmosphere had turned against him. A rat in a maze, except this maze had no cheese, just the occasional threat of dissection. The Xynar officer slithered in, eyes floating like a pair of indecisive marbles. Dr. Kyrn, it hissed, voice like a hiss of steam from a boiling kettle. You seem to enjoy our hospitality. I'd give it a 3-star review, Savid replied, voice dripping with enough sarcasm to drown a small planet. The view's terrible and the company leaves something to be desired. The officer's eyes narrowed, if that was even possible with orbs that weren't fixed in place. We are curious about your activities. The implication was clear. They'd noticed his little rebellion in the making. Just trying to keep busy, you know, Savid said. Idle hands and all that, wouldn't want to get rusty. The officer gave a hiss that might have been laughter if laughter could sound like a deflating balloon. You will find no escape here. The Xynar are eternal. Savid rolled his eyes, though the effect was somewhat lost given his inverted predicament. Eternal, sure, but are you efficient? That's the real question. The officer's eyes twitched, which Savid decided to take as a win. The Xynar scurried out, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the oppressive hum of the room. Well, that could have gone worse, he muttered to himself. At least he wasn't being hauled off to whatever passed for a Xynar re-education camp, yet. He turned his attention back to the panel, fingers working with the deftness of someone who'd spent too many nights tinkering with gadgets rather than sleeping. The cables behind the panel were a mess, a spaghetti junction of alien technology that would give an electrician nightmares for months. But Savid had an idea, and it was the kind that could either save their skins or get them flayed alive. Farah's voice crackled in his ear, the static like music compared to the monotonous drone of the Xynar machinery. Savid, status update, still hanging around, he quipped, adjusting a particularly stubborn wire that seemed intent on staying in the wrong place. Our hosts are getting suspicious. We might need to speed things up. Understood. The others are in position, ready to do their part. The plan was ambitious, which was a polite way of saying borderline suicidal. But as plans went, it was their best shot at giving the Xynar a collective headache. They'd pinpointed several key nodes in the tower system, places where a well-placed surge might turn the Xynar's technology into a very large, very expensive paperweight. Are you sure about this, Savid? Farah asked, a note of concern in her voice. This isn't exactly a drill. Positive, Savid replied, injecting as much confidence as he could muster. It's like my mother always said, when life gives you lemons, find someone with a paper cut. I'm not sure that's how it goes, Farah said, amusement threading through her words. Close enough, he said, grinning despite himself. Let's show these ratsuits what humans are made of. Time was of the essence, and even the most generous estimate had them on the verge of catastrophe. The Xynar were tightening security, their vigilance a tightening noose around Savid's neck. But necessity was the mother of invention, or improvisation in this case, and Savid had every intention of turning this prison into a launching pad for their escape. He worked with a quiet intensity, his mind a flurry of calculations and contingencies. The Xynar's systems were complex but not invulnerable. There were cracks to exploit, weaknesses to pry open with the right leverage. It was a high-stakes game of chess, and Savid had never been great at chess, but he had a knack for poker, a skill that involved bluffing and guts more than pure strategy. The Iors bled into each other, a haze of whispered commands and frantic adjustments. The humans, his ragtag band of would-be saboteurs, were coordinating with a precision that might have surprised him if he wasn't too busy to appreciate it. It was surprising what desperation and a shared enemy could achieve. Savid, Farah's voice, was a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink of a particularly tangled problem. "We've got a window, but it's closing fast. Can you trigger the surge?" "Already on it," he replied, fingers dancing over the wires with a surgeon's precision or a butcher's enthusiasm depending on the outcome. "I give it a 50-50 shot. Those are not comforting odds. Comfort's overrated." Savid took a breath, the kind that felt like it might be his last, and made the final connection. "Here goes nothing." There was a moment of silence, the calm before the storm, and then the world, or at least the Zynar part of it, went dark. Or rather, it went into a chaotic frenzy of flashing lights and blaring alarms, the sound of 1,000 systems crying out in protest. Savid, Farah's voice, was nearly drowned out by the cacophony. "What did you do?" "Improvised," he replied, watching as the lights inside the room flickered like a dying spotlight. Time to move. It was chaos, glorious chaos. The Zynar had underestimated their prisoners, and now they were paying the price. Savid's plan had worked, though he wasn't about to start celebrating just yet. There was still a lot that could go wrong and likely would if Murphy's Law had its way. The Zynar were scrambling, their wet rat suit selves darting through corridors like panicked ants when a boot hovers above. Savid used the confusion to his advantage, slipping free from his bonds with a deftness that spoke of practice or desperation. He reconnected with Farah, their voices overlapping in hurried updates and half-formed plans. "The relays are down," she reported. "We've got a small window before they reboot." "Then let's make it count," Savid replied, his mind racing through the possibilities. They needed to reach the central hub, the nerve center of the tower, and disrupt it enough to guarantee a way out. The others were already on the move, a ragtag group of humans united by necessity and a shared desire to avoid becoming alien science projects. They met in the shadows, each carrying the weight of their own fears, but none willing to back down. Their journey through the tower was anything but smooth. The Zynar, though disorganized, were still a formidable obstacle, and their numbers alone were enough to give Savid pause. But they pushed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option, not if they wanted to see a sunrise that didn't come through a barred window. "We're close," Farah said, her voice a steady presence in the chaotic world. "The central hub is just ahead. Let's hope it's not guarded by more than rats in suits," Savid replied, trying to ignore the fear clawing at his insides. They were in uncharted territory, and every step felt like walking a tightrope without a net. As they rounded a corner, Savid felt a familiar thrill, the kind that came with standing on the edge of something monumental. The central hub loomed before them, a citadel of alien technology that pulsed with an eerie light. "Ready?" Farah asked, her expression a mirror of his own resolve. "Always," Savid replied, though it was a lie. But sometimes lies were all you had to keep you going. They moved as one, a human wave crashing against the Zynar defenses. The fight was brutal, chaotic, the kind of skirmish that left little room for elegance or finesse. It was a brawl, plain and simple, and Savid found himself in the thick of it, dodging and weaving with a grim determination. The Zynar were unprepared for the ferocity of their prisoners, their arrogance a blade turned against them. Savid fought with everything he had, his mind a blur of calculations and instinct, each movement a step closer to their goal. Amidst the chaos, he saw the moment, the opportunity he'd been waiting for, the chance to strike at the heart of their captor's power. He surged forward, adrenaline lending him speed, and reached for the control center. With a final, desperate effort, he triggered the override, a surge of defiance in the face of impossible odds. The Zynar systems reacted with a cacophony of alarms and flashing lights, the chaos escalating as their world began to unravel. It was a victory, albeit a temporary one, but in that moment, Savid Kayern felt the exhilarating rush of triumph, a victory not just for himself, but for every human who refused to go quietly. He turned to Farah, their eyes meeting in the flickering light. "We did it," he said, breathless but alive. "For now," she replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Let's get the hell out of here before they realize what hit them." Together, they led the charge through the crumbling heart of the Zynar tower, defiance in every step. Escape was within reach, and for once, hope was more than just a whisper in the dark. It was a roar. The Zynar tower might have been in chaos, but that didn't mean it was going to be a cakewalk to escape. The Zynar, for all their wet rodent-like charm, were rallying quicker than a cat in a tin can factory, and Dr. Savid Kayr knew they weren't going to let a bunch of humans just waltz out unscathed. "Well, that escalated quickly," he muttered, ducking under a sparking wire dangling like the world's most aggressive Christmas decoration. Around him, the cacophony of alarms rang out, a discordant symphony that set his teeth on edge. Farah, always one for stating the obvious with a flourish, piped up through the calm. "Looks like they're not rolling out the red carpet, Savid. Just as well, he replied, kicking aside a piece of debris that had the audacity to trip him. Red's never been my color. They didn't have the luxury of time. The Xynar were regrouping, and frankly, Savid had experienced enough of their hospitality to last several lifetimes. It was time to move from annoying pests to revolutionary pests. Listen up, Savid barked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through gelatinous alien soup. We need to coordinate or we're toast. I toast, came a voice from the ranks. Jax, one of the more colorful members of their ragtag rebellion. Burnt to a crisp if we don't hoof it. We're not hoofing. We're strategizing, Savid corrected, though he appreciated the sentiment. Here's the deal. We can't keep running in circles with our tails between our legs. We've got tails, Jax quipped, forever the comedian. Savid rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. Metaphorically speaking, now shut up and let me finish. The group gathered around, forming a loose circle with Savid at its center. He felt like a general surrounded by a mismatched army in various states of dishevelment and moral decay. Plan simple, he began, gesturing with a flourish that was perhaps more confident than he felt. We hit him where it hurts. The Xynar have a central relay control, blow that, and we make their tech as useful as a chocolate teapot. Chocolate teapot, Farah arched an eyebrow. You wouldn't have one of those stashed somewhere, would you? Focus, Savid snapped, though the thought of chocolate was more appealing than he'd like to admit. We disrupt their systems at the relay, catch them with their pants down, and get the hell out of here before they figure it out. Great, and where exactly is this magical relay? Farah asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. According to the schematics I nicked off their mainframe, it's in the central core. Problem is, it's guarded tighter than a miser's wallet. Figures, someone muttered in the back. Savid took a deep breath, trying to channel the kind of authority that leaders are supposed to have. We split into teams. One creates a distraction, make it loud, make it messy. The rest of us hit the relay and knock it out. Sounds like a party, Jack said, grinning from ear to ear. More like a suicide mission, Savid replied, not unkindly. But I hear those are all the rage these days. The group dispersed, adrenaline and the promise of imminent death making them move with purpose. Savid found Farah lingering, her expression one of concern. You sure about this, Savid? Last time you improvised, we nearly got flayed. He nodded, the weight of their situation pressing down like a lead blanket. It's risky, but it's all we've got. Besides, the Xynar aren't the forgiving sort. No kidding, Farah said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. But you know, if we get out of this alive, I'm holding you to that chocolate teapot. I'll bake you a whole set, Savid promised, though he doubted either of them would live to see it. The next ire was a blur of frenetic energy and planning, which was a polite way of saying it was a cluster of the highest order. The humans moved like a swarm of angry bees, guided more by instinct than coordination, but somehow it worked. Savid led his team through the bowels of the tower, the metal corridors echoing with the distant sounds of conflict. Alarms continued to blare, the Xynar systems screaming in protest at the sabotage. They moved with stealth, or as much stealth as a group of desperate humans could muster, toward the central relay. They reached the core without incident, which was worrying in itself. The Xynar weren't the kind to leave their precious technology unguarded. It was only a matter of time before they encountered resistance, and Savid knew they had to act fast. All right, let's get this done, he said, motioning for a couple of his compatriots to take point. Farah, you've got the charge. Right here, she replied, hefting a compact device that looked suspiciously like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and wishful thinking. Good, once it's in place, his words were cut off by the sound of approaching footsteps, the heavy clatter of boots against metal. Incoming, he hissed, ducking behind a console as the Xynar entered the room. The moment hung in the air like a bad smell. The Xynar officer, a particularly unpleasant specimen with a face reminiscent of an overripe fruit, barked orders in their guttural language. Savid couldn't understand a word, but the intent was clear enough. Find the intruders and make them regret ever being born. In the tense silence that followed, Farah glanced over at him, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Well, this complicates things, she whispered. Only if you're an optimist, Savid replied, his mind racing through potential solutions. We need a distraction. Jax, bless his suicidal heart, raised a hand. I can do distractions. Before Savid could protest, Jax sprang into action with all the subtlety of a firecracker at a funeral. The sudden chaos was a thing of beauty, if one appreciated the anarchic ballet of flailing limbs and startled aliens. The Xynar were drawn to the commotion like moths to a flame, leaving the relay momentarily unguarded. Savid seized the opportunity, signaling for Farah to plant the charge. Quickly, he urged, the urgency in his voice propelling them forward. Farah worked with the precision of a surgeon, her hands moving quickly to secure the device to the relay. Savid kept watch, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. How's it coming? He asked, his voice strained. Almost there, Farah replied, her tone as tense as a wire. The seconds stretched into eternity as she finished her task, the charge blinking with a reassuringly ominous light. Done, she whispered, stepping back with a sigh of relief. It was a small victory, a fleeting moment of triumph in a world gone mad, but it was enough. Savage, Jax called out, his voice strained. We've got company. He turned to see the Xynar regrouping, their numbers swelling as reinforcements arrived. They looked angry, but then again, Savage wasn't sure he'd ever seen a Xynar that didn't look like it was perpetually pissed off at the universe. Time to go, he shouted, gesturing for his team to fall back. They retreated with as much dignity as they could muster, which wasn't much given the circumstances. The Xynar were hot on their heels, determined to catch their prey. Savage led the charge, weaving through the corridors with a speed that surprised even him. The tower around them was alive with the sounds of battle, the humans fighting with a desperation born of necessity. The escape was a blur, a chaotic dance through the twisting corridors of the Xynar stronghold. Every turn presented a new challenge, a new obstacle to overcome, but they pushed forward, driven by the hope of freedom. As they neared the exit, Savage allowed himself a brief moment of hope. The Xynar were relentless, but they were also predictable, and he'd bet his last ration bar on their inability to adapt quickly enough. Ahead, the airlock loomed like a beacon, the promise of freedom just within reach. They stumbled through, breathless and battered, but alive. The charge had done its job, the Xynar systems in disarray, buying them the precious seconds they needed. They regrouped outside the tower, hearts pounding in their chests as they surveyed the chaos left in their wake. The Xynar had underestimated them, and it had cost them dearly. Farah stood beside Savage, a wry smile playing on her lips. We did it, she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. Don't start celebrating just yet, Savage warned, though he couldn't deny the relief that washed over him. It's not over until we're off this rock. Beside him, Jax let out a bark of laughter, his face streaked with grime but alight with triumph. Hell of a day, huh? Savage nodded, a wry grin tugging at his lips. Just another day in paradise, he replied, though they both knew it was far from over. The fight wasn't finished, the battle far from one, but it was a start. A spark of defiance in a universe that had done its best to snuff them out, and for now it was enough. As they moved away from the tower, Savage couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope, a dangerous, fragile thing in a world gone mad. But he held on to it, clung to it like a lifeline, because sometimes hope was all you had, and sometimes it was enough. Even if the universe had a nasty habit of taking it away, the Xynar Tower loomed like a bad memory that refused to fade. Dr. Savage Kyron stood there, panting, and tried to ignore the insistent squawking from his comm. Farah's voice crackled through, shrill and demanding, like a mother hen that had found her chicks with a bottle of vodka. Savage, what's the plan now? Are we just gonna stand here until they decide to invite us back in for tea and interrogation? Savage wiped the sweat from his brow, a mix of grime and desperation that had become his signature cologne. I'm working on it, Farah. Just give me a sec to, I dunno, manufacture a miracle or something. The tower wasn't giving up easily. Reinforcements were probably already on the way, and while they'd managed to throw a spanner in the works, the Xynar weren't exactly known for their forgiving nature. In fact, they had about as much mercy as a tax collector with a grudge. Jax sidled up to him, his characteristic grin plastered across his face like a bad tattoo. Feeling good about the plan, Doc? He asked, though his voice suggested he was more interested in the joke than the answer. Oh sure, Savage replied, sarcasm dripping like acid, except for the part where we might die horribly. Otherwise stellar, Jax chuckled, his laughter a bright spot against the dreary backdrop of potential doom. Come on, it's not like it's the first time we've been in over our heads. Remember that time with the airlock and the rogue AI that wanted to turn us into human popsicles? That was you, remember. Farah cut in, her tone like an exasperated schoolteacher. I distinctly recall yelling about how stupid it was to taunt an AI with access to the freezer controls. A learning experience, Jax countered airily. Live and learn, or in our case, live and try not to die stupidly. Savage couldn't help but chuckle, though the sound was more dry and cracked than he'd have liked. It was amazing, really, how gallows humor could be a lifeline in times of crisis. All right, enough nostalgia. We need to focus. As they moved cautiously through the wreckage left in their wake, the Xynar Tower hummed ominously, a constant reminder that their escape was far from guaranteed. The walls seemed to close in, the dull throb of alien machinery, a relentless background noise that gnawed at their nerves. It wasn't long before the Xynar's psychological warfare began. The first sign was a subtle change in the air, a pressure that made it hard to breathe, as though the tower itself was trying to crush their spirits. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters along the corridors. Feels like a haunted house, Jax muttered, not entirely joking. All we need now is some cheesy music and a skeleton on a string. Don't tempt fate, Farah retorted, glancing warily around. The Xynar might just take you up on that. Savid felt the weight of his responsibilities, each failure a festering wound in his psyche. His plans, once so carefully laid, seemed to unravel at the seams. The Xynar were regrouping faster than anticipated, their tactics shifting with an unsettling fluidity. I feel like Sisyphus with less job security, Savid mumbled, mostly to himself. Who? Jax asked, eyebrows raised. Ancient myth, Farah supplied, guy who pushed a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time he got close to the top. Sounds like my love life, Jax quipped, earning a snort from Farah. Enough, Savid snapped, though the banter was a balm for his fraying nerves. We need to keep moving. He was acutely aware of the eyes on him, his ragged band of misfits looking to him for guidance, for hope. But hope was a tricky little bastard, slippery and elusive, and Savid had never been one to put much stock in it. Yet here they were, clinging to the possibility of survival with all the tenacity of a rodent on a sinking ship. The comm crackled again, an unwelcome reminder of their precarious situation. Savid, Farah's voice came through, strained. They're trying to cut us off. We need an exit strategy. Working on it, Savid replied, though even he could hear the thinness of his reassurance. Xynar were closing in, and his mind raced through options like a gambler with a losing hand. Got any bright ideas? Jax asked, nudging Savid's shoulder. Preferably ones that don't involve us becoming alien sushi. Yeah, Savid said dryly, but I left my magic wand in my other pants. The Xynar's tactics shifted again, this time with a broadcast, a voice booming through the corridors, distorted and alien. It was the kind of sound that made your skin crawl, like a rusty nail dragged along a chalkboard. Humans, the voice intoned, your resistance is futile. Surrender now and your deaths will be swift and merciful. Jack snorted, rolling his eyes. Wow, they've really upped their hospitality game. I feel so welcomed. Savage shook his head, trying to focus through the fog of doubt that clouded his mind. The Xynar were playing a different game now, one that threatened to break them from within. Don't listen to it, he said, raising his voice to cut through the noise. It's just a scare tactic. They're trying to mess with our heads, doing a bang-up job of it, Farah muttered, though she squared her shoulders with determination. The corridors stretched endlessly, a labyrinth designed to confuse and disorient. Each turn felt like a step deeper into the maw of madness, yet Savid pressed on, driven by stubborn defiance. How's it looking, Doc? Jax asked, his voice a mix of bravado and genuine concern. Like a shit sandwich, Savid replied, the corners of his mouth tilting upwards despite everything. But we're still biting. Delicious, Jax said with a grin that was mostly teeth. My favorite, the Xynar weren't giving them any time to breathe, their presence a constant shadow that loomed larger with each passing moment. The human situation was precarious, a knife's edge balanced on the whim of chance. But Savid wasn't ready to give up, not yet. We need to find another way out, he said, his mind working overtime to piece together some semblance of a plan. The main exits are a no-go, too well guarded, but there's gotta be something else. You got a secret map, or are we just hoping to stumble upon a conveniently unlocked door? Farah asked, and though her words were biting, there was an undercurrent of hope. Both, Savid replied, though he'd settle for blind luck at this point. They moved as one, a ragtag group united by desperation and the refusal to let the universe have the last laugh. Every step was a gamble, every decision a roll of the dice. The Xynar continued their barrage of psychological warfare, the lights dimming further until the corridors were shrouded in a twilight gloom. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the tower itself was conspiring against them. Ever get the feeling we're being watched? Jax asked, his voice a hushed whisper. All the time, Savid replied, casting a wary glance over his shoulder. But that's just paranoia talking, or the Xynar, Farah added. They've got eyes everywhere, everywhere. Jax grinned, though the expression was more rueful than amused. That's just bad design. Who needs that many eyes? The tension was mounting, a coiling snake ready to strike. Savid felt it keenly, the weight of responsibility a constant companion on this twisted journey. He was supposed to be the leader, the one with answers. But right now, he was as lost as the rest of them. Still, there was something to be said for resilience, for the stubborn refusal to lie down and die. The human situation might be dire, their options limited, but they were still fighting. And as long as they kept moving, there was hope. Fragile, fleeting hope. Any sign of an exit? Farah asked, her voice cutting through the gloom like a lifeline. Not yet, Savid replied, though he was acutely aware of the ticking clock. The Xynar wouldn't give them much longer before they closed the net entirely. We need to move faster, he added, urgency lending steel to his words. But where? Jax asked, voicing the question that hung like a specter over their heads. Up, Savid said after a moment's thought, the idea forming out of desperation more than anything else. If we can get to the roof, maybe we can signal for help. Brilliant, Jax said, though his voice held more sarcasm than sincerity. And when that doesn't work, we can just jump. At least it'd be a change of scenery, Farah quipped. Let's just hope it doesn't come to that, Savid said, though he couldn't deny the dark humor of the idea. They pressed on, each step a testament to their resolve. The Xynar might have the advantage, might have the upper hand in technology and numbers, but they didn't have the one thing that kept the humans going: sheer bloody-minded determination. As they climbed, the tower seemed to groan, the structure protesting their advance. The Xynar wouldn't let them reach the top without a fight, but Savid was ready for whatever they threw his way, or at least he hoped he was. "How you holding up, Doc?" Jax asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Like a champ," Savid replied, though his breath was coming in ragged gasps. "Just another day in the life." "Yeah, right," Jax snorted, though the camaraderie was a balm against the encroaching darkness. They reached a landing, a brief respite before the final push. Savid took a moment to catch his breath, the weight of their journey pressing heavily on his shoulders. It was a moment of calm, a fleeting pause before the storm broke once more. "We're almost there," he said, though it was as much a reassurance for himself as it was for the others. "Think the Xynar are planning a welcome party?" Farah asked, her tone a mix of sarcasm and genuine inquiry. "Probably," Savid replied, though he couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. "But we'll just have to crash it." The final ascent was a blur of motion, the humans moving with the kind of desperate energy that only comes from the brink of disaster. They were so close now, the promise of freedom within reach, yet still tantalizingly out of grasp. As they burst onto the rooftop, the night air hit them like a slap, cold and biting. It was a strange sensation after the oppressive heat of the tower, and for a moment they simply stood there, gulping in the fresh air like survivors of a shipwreck. "Well, we made it," Jack said, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Now what now?" Savid replied, scanning the horizon for any sign of salvation. "We pray that someone out there is listening." It was a long shot, a gamble that defied reason, but sometimes that's all you had in the face of overwhelming odds. And as they stood there, the night stretching endlessly around them, Savid couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They might have been just a ragtag group of misfits, but they were still standing, still fighting, and sometimes that was enough, at least for now. As they stood on the rooftop, a thin breeze tugging at their battered clothes, Savid Kyrn couldn't help but feel like he just stepped into a really bad sequel, the kind no one asked for but everyone had to suffer through. The Xynar Tower loomed behind them, a monument to everything they'd just survived, or at least postponed. "All right," Jax began, rubbing his hands together as though he was about to get down to a meal instead of face the brink of oblivion. "So what's the plan, Doc?" "Call for Space Uber." Savid looked around, his eyes scanning the night sky for a miracle that wasn't going to come. "Something like that," he replied, his voice a mix of determination and the kind of gallows humor that had kept him semi-sane. Before he could elaborate, the comm crackled to life in Savid's hand, Farah's voice cutting through the static. "Savid, we've got a problem." "Join the club," Savid muttered. "What's up?" "It's the Xynar," Farah continued. "They're regrouping faster than we thought." "If we don't move, we're dead." "Great," Jack said, rolling his eyes. "And here I was thinking we'd just hit the jackpot, don't we always?" Farah replied with just enough sarcasm to make it bearable. Savid was about to respond when the comm crackled again, this time with a voice that wasn't Farah's or any of his crew. "Dr. Kyrn, it's me, Arx." The name snapped Savid's attention into focus. Arx was a Xynar, but not just any Xynar. He was the kind who didn't quite toe the party line, the kind who had more questions than orders and more doubts than convictions, kind of like a politician who actually believed in ethics, a mythical being if ever there was one. "Arx," Savid said, his voice cautious, "didn't expect to hear from you again." "Thought you'd left us to rot." "Yeah, well, if you humans blow up the place, where am I supposed to get my entertainment?" Arx replied, half joking but mostly serious. "I didn't know Xynar had a sense of humor," Jax commented, earning a half smile from Savid. "Most don't," Arx said, "which is why I need to talk to you." "Talk fast," Savid replied. "Our dance card's pretty full right now." "Right," Arx said, the words coming quickly now. "The Xynar have a weakness." "Well, not so much a weakness as a blind spot." "Blind spot," Savid echoed, the gears in his head turning. "Go on, it's old tech," Arx continued. "Stuff they haven't upgraded because they think it's beneath them." "Stubborn as hell, my people." "Sounds familiar," Jax quipped, nodding toward Savid. "Shut up," Savid muttered, though there was no heat in it. Arx's voice crackled back to life. "The Xynar Tower's core is susceptible to jamming, a pulse, if you will. It'll disrupt their systems long enough for you to get out." "Why tell us this?" Savid asked, skepticism creeping in. "Because," Arx said, and Savid could almost hear the shrug in his voice, "sometimes you have to root for the underdog. Plus your downfall would make my shifts incredibly boring." "Touching," Savid replied, though a plan was already forming in his mind. "Details are coming through to your comm," Arx finished. "Use it well." The line went dead, leaving Savid with more questions than answers, but also a glimmer of hope. A hope that was about as trustworthy as a politician's promise, but a hope nonetheless. "Well, that was unexpected," Farah said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Unexpected's the only thing we can count on, Savid replied. His eyes darted over the data ARCs had sent, the numbers and diagrams swimming in front of him like a particularly malicious math teacher's pop quiz. Can we trust it? Jax asked, peering over Savid's shoulder. Do we have a choice? Savid countered, and Jax had to admit he didn't. All right, Savid said, clapping his hands together. Here's the plan. We need to get to the tower's control room. It's the only place we can send out the pulse. And we do that how? Farah asked, already sounding exasperated. We climb back down, sneak in through the maintenance shaft, and hope Arx isn't just screwing with us, Savid replied, his voice a mix of confidence and the quiet resignation of a man who knows the universe has an unfair sense of humor. Sounds foolproof, Jack said with a grin. Good thing we're all fools, Savid smirked despite himself. Let's move before we lose what little momentum we've got. As they made their way back into the bowels of the tower, Savid couldn't shake the feeling that they were gambling with some very loaded dice. But then, that had been the story of his life. Always a coin flip away from disaster, but somehow still standing. The darkness seemed to close in on them as they descended. Zynar Tower's walls felt more oppressive than ever, as if they were alive, conspiring against the intruders within. Every step felt like it echoed with 1,000 screams, the remnants of those who'd come before and failed. Hey Doc, Jack said, breaking the silence, you ever think we're just in one long-running joke, and the universe is the comedian, more like a bad sitcom, Savid replied. And we're the laugh track, speak for yourself, Farah chimed in. I'm the lead actress. They reached the maintenance shaft, the narrow confines greeting them like an old, unwelcome friend. It was a tight fit, and Savid could feel every scrape and bruise from the past battles protesting against this newest indignity. This better work, Jax muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machinery that surrounded them. It will, Savid replied, more to convince himself than anyone else. Failure wasn't an option, but it was definitely a possibility. Finally, they reached the control room, its walls humming with the dull throb of alien machinery. The room was empty, which was both a relief and a new cause for concern. If Arx was right, they wouldn't have long before someone noticed their intrusion. Okay, let's not screw this up, Savid said, moving to the control panel. The interface was alien, a mess of unfamiliar symbols and blinking lights that would have made any sane person turn tail and run. Lucky for him, sanity was never his strong suit. As he worked, the others kept watch, their eyes flicking nervously to the door every few seconds. Time was slipping away, and Savid could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of every decision threatening to crush him. And then, just as his resolve started to fray, the pulse went out, a subtle hum that seemed to ripple through the air, a whispering promise that maybe, just maybe, they'd caught a break. It's done, Savid said, stepping back and taking a deep breath. Let's get the hell out of here. As they retraced their steps, the tower seemed different somehow, the oppressive weight lifting just enough to allow a sliver of hope to creep in. Maybe Arx's gamble had paid off after all. Back on the rooftop, Savid gazed out at the sky once more, his heart pounding with the adrenaline of what they'd just accomplished. The odds were still against them, the Zynar still an ever-present threat, but for the first time their fate wasn't entirely out of their hands. Well, Doc, Jack said, clapping him on the back. Looks like we might live to fight another day, or get caught and die horribly, Farah offered, though there was a spark in her eyes that suggested she was invested in the former. Either way, Savid replied, allowing himself a rare moment of optimism, we've still got a chance. And as the first hints of dawn began to chase away the darkness, Savid realized that sometimes, against all odds, even a ragtag group of misfits could find a way forward. It might not be easy, it might not be pretty, but it was something. And in a universe that thrived on chaos, something was all you could really ask for. The Zynar Tower's control room felt like the inside of a sardine can on a bad day. The air was dense with the smell of overheated alien tech and defeat, a familiar scent in Savid Kayern's life. He stood, hands on hips, surveying the blinking console. It was a jumble of symbols that might as well have been an avant-garde art piece or the latest in abstract alien poetry. Either way, it was his ticket out of this mess, or straight to hell. All right, folks, Savid announced, his voice laced with the kind of false cheer you'd expect from someone facing a firing squad. Let's see if our alien friend's intel holds water. Jax leaned against a wall, his arms crossed, a sardonic grin playing on his lips. I was kinda hoping for dramatic last stand, but if you've got a plan, who am I to judge? Dramatic last stands are for heroes, Savid replied. We're more the escape with our tails between our legs type. Farah, ever the realist, chimed in. Let's just hope this Arx guy isn't leading us to a noose, Savid nodded, acknowledging the undercurrent of skepticism. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, but desperation often made for strange bedfellows. If this goes sideways, at least we'll go down in a blaze of incompetence. He turned back to the console, fingers hovering over the controls. Each button was a potential catastrophe wrapped in ambiguity, but he had a knack for winging it. His plan, such as it was, relied on the Xynar's outdated tech being as consistently inconsistent as his luck. With a resigned sigh, Savid punched a sequence into the console. The room responded with a low hum, the kind that vibrated in your bones and promised either salvation or doom, or both. Why not both? Is it supposed to be doing that? Jax asked, eyebrows raised. No idea, Savid admitted. Honesty was the best policy when you didn't have a clue. The screen's flickered alien text scrolling faster than a caffeine addict on a keyboard marathon. Savid could feel the tension in the room ratchet up a notch, each second stretching like an awkward pause at a family reunion. Farah checked the door, her impatience palpable. Any minute now, Xynar goons are gonna burst in here wondering why their systems are having a midlife crisis. Then let's give them something to really worry about, Savid said, as he initiated the pulse arcs had promised would throw the Xynar tech into chaos. The tower shuddered violently, the lights flickering like a bad horror movie. The pulse rippled through the alien systems, each surge registered with a satisfying whine. Alarms blared, a mechanical symphony of panic. Somewhere the Xynar were losing their collective minds, a small victory in a sea of defeats. Looks like it's working, Farah said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. Or we just made things worse. Same difference, Jax pointed out. Either way, it's not boring. The chaos was their cue to move. Savid gestured toward the door, and they hustled out of the control room, blending into the pandemonium. The tower's corridors were a hive of confusion, Xynar staff rushing to contain the breach, unaware that the real threat was slipping right under their noses. The trio moved with purpose, adrenaline their only guide. Each footfall echoed with the urgency of a last-ditch gamble. If they were caught now, well, there'd be no coming back for an encore. Their path was a jagged line of improvisation, dodging guards with the grace of a drunk dancer. It was almost funny, in a dark sort of way, how the Xynar, with all their technology, were undone by their own arrogance. The irony wasn't lost on Savid, who couldn't resist a grin even as they barreled down another corridor. "Where to, boss?" Jax asked, his usual bravado muted by the seriousness of their situation. "The hangar," Savid replied. "If we can get to a ship, we might just pull this off." They rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a group of Xynar soldiers. Both parties froze, the air thick with the kind of awkward tension usually reserved for ex-lovers at a wedding. Savid's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment where everything could unravel. But then, in a stroke of luck or perhaps cosmic comedy, the soldiers rushed past, too preoccupied with the alarms and their own frantic orders to notice the humans in their midst. "See," Savid said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nothing to it, speak for yourself," Farah muttered, but there was a glint of defiance in her eyes. "I'm getting too old for this," Jax chuckled. "You mean you'll retire after this? What'll you do? Write a memoir? How not to get killed in alien towers?" Farah replied with a wry smile. "Bestseller material." The hangar loomed ahead, a cavernous space filled with ships of alien design. It was a tantalizing sight, the promise of escape and freedom hanging just out of reach. But first they had to navigate the final hurdle, a security checkpoint manned by the most alert guards they'd seen all day, naturally. "Plan?" Farah asked, glancing at Savid. The question hung in the air, a challenge and a plea all in one. "Simple," Savid said with a shrug. "We bluff our way through." Jax snorted. "Oh, good. I was worried you'd suggest something reckless." Savid took a deep breath, steeling himself for what could either be the moment of triumph or a spectacular failure. With a nonchalance he didn't feel, he strode toward the guards, heart pounding like a drum. "Hey," he called out, trying to sound authoritative. "What are you doing standing around? There's a breach." "Get to the lower levels." The guards hesitated, confusion writ large on their rodent-like faces. It was a gamble, a bluff worthy of the best poker table. Savid held his breath, willing them to buy into the lie. To his astonishment, they did. With a flurry of activity, the guards abandoned their post, rushing to obey the false directive. The path was clear, albeit briefly. "Well, I'll be damned," Jax said, clapping Savid on the back. "You've got a talent for this. Let's not push our luck," Savid replied, leading them into the hangar. They made a beeline for the nearest ship, a sleek vessel that promised speed and stealth. The outer hull gleamed under the hangar lights, an appealing invitation to anyone desperate enough to take it. Farah paused at the hatch, casting a wary glance at their surroundings. "We sure this thing can fly? Guess we'll find out," Savid said, punching the access code Arcs had provided into the panel. The door slid open with a hiss and they scrambled aboard, nerves fraying with the expectation of pursuit. Inside, the ship was a marvel of alien engineering, though Savid had little time to admire the view. He slid into the pilot's seat, the controls a familiar jumble of levers and switches. Alien tech might have been a mystery, but flying was universal. Jax took the co-pilot's chair, strapping in with a flourish. "Ready to make history, Doc, or crash spectacularly?" Savid replied, powering up the engines. The ship roared to life, a rumble that resonated through his bones. With a deft touch, he guided the vessel out of the hangar, the Zynar tower falling away beneath them. Behind, alarms shrieked their indignation, but Savid didn't look back. The vastness of space opened up before them, a tapestry of stars and possibilities. "Well, we did it," Farah said, disbelief coloring her words. "We actually got out, for now," Jax added, ever the realist. "Let's not start planning the victory parade just yet." Savid focused on the controls, his mind racing with the implications of their escape. They'd outmaneuvered the Zynar, turned their own arrogance against them, and lived to tell the tale. But victory was a fickle mistress, and he knew better than to count his winnings too soon. As they soared through the void, the enormity of their actions weighed on him. They'd struck a blow against an empire that prided itself on being untouchable. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Where to now?" Farah asked, settling into her seat with a sigh of relief. Savid considered their options, or lack thereof. "Anywhere that's not here sounds good. Works for me," Jax said, stretching out with the ease of a man who defied death once too often. As long as there's a bar. The ship sailed on, the stars stretching out before them like a welcome road. They'd escaped the Zynar's grasp, for now at least. The universe was still a dangerous place, their future uncertain, but they were alive, and sometimes that was enough. "Hey Doc," Jax said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Next time, can we not nearly die horribly?" Savid chuckled, the sound mingling with the hum of the ship. "No promises, but I'll see what I can do." Farah grinned, a rare expression of genuine amusement. "Well, if nothing else, it's never dull with you two around. Stick with us," Jax replied, "and you'll either end up rich or dead. No middle ground." As they cruised through the starry expanse, Savid allowed himself a moment of peace. They'd pulled it off against all odds, and while the universe wasn't exactly their friend, it had given them one hell of a story. In the grand scheme of things, maybe that was all anyone could really ask for. The hangover that hung in the ship's cockpit was one of silence and disbelief. Savid Kyrn was deep in thought, hands softly drumming on the console as the stars drifted by like lazy fireflies. His mind was a hurricane of adrenaline, come-down, and introspection, a dangerous combo best handled with a stiff drink, but they were fresh out of those too. "Bit for your thoughts?" Farah asked from her seat, her voice cutting through the quiet like a well-aimed laser blast. "A bit. Inflation's a killer," Savid shot back, a smirk toying at his lips. "Thinking about how we managed to piss off the universe's most unforgiving landlords and still waltz out with our hides intact." "Not all intact," Jax chimed in, raising a hand to point at the bruise forming on his forehead. "Someone needs to tell the ship designers to add a little more headroom. I swear this thing is built for Zynar jockeys." Savid chuckled, the sound low and rough like gravel scraping across steel. "If you think the headroom's bad, wait till you need the bathroom." Jax groaned theatrically. "Please don't remind me. I'm still recovering from the last encounter with alien plumbing." The three of them settled into a companionable quiet, the kind that only occurs when you've shared a near-death experience. It was the kind of silence that could be filled with anything, from dreams of revenge to musings on existential futility. Today it was the latter. "I keep thinking about what's next," Farah said, breaking the silence again. "We've got the tech, we could change everything or nothing." Savid leaned back, letting out a long breath. Alien tech was their golden ticket and potentially their ball and chain. The Zynar wanted it for themselves, and humans weren't supposed to even lay eyes on it, let alone steal it, yet here they were. Cosmic jokers in a game with no rules. "Change everything. That's a tall order," Jax said, scratching his chin. "But if you mean cloning tech, well, that could certainly shake things up. Imagine an army of me. The galaxy wouldn't know what hit it." Terrifying thought, Farah deadpanned. Savid watched the exchange, his mind ticking over possibilities. Cloning wasn't just forbidden, it was the taboo of taboos. Humanity had long since decided that playing God was best left to the godless. Yet, cloning could mean more than just soldiers, Savid mused aloud. If we're careful, it could mean redefining what it means to be human, or it just makes us better at dying en masse, Jax quipped, his tone light but not unserious. Farah rolled her eyes. "Let's not go all philosophical. We've got bigger problems like surviving the next month." Indeed, their escape didn't mean freedom. The Zynar were regrouping faster than an overcaffeinated poker player. It was a matter of time before they'd be on the hunt, and this little joyride would end in a spectacular crash of galactic proportions. "We need to use what we've got," Savid said, his voice firm with decision. "We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We've got to turn this into something meaningful." Jax asked, raising an eyebrow. "Does that mean we're going to start a revolution or something equally dramatic?" Savid considered the suggestion, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "Not quite, more like a recalibration. We've the tech to potentially change the game. We just need to figure out the rules before the Zynar rewrite them for us." "Sounds like a plan," Farah said, though her tone was laced with skepticism. "A half-baked, dangerous plan, but a plan nonetheless. Wouldn't be our style if it wasn't, Savid replied, his grin matching the mischief in his eyes. As the ship hurtled through space, the discussion meandered from strategy to survival with the ease of those who've seen too much but cling to hope anyway. Plans were laid, contingencies considered, and new beginnings plotted. "Hey, Doc," Jax said, the barest hint of seriousness in his otherwise irreverent tone. "Do you ever think about what happens if we actually succeed?" "I mean really change things." Savid paused, the weight of the question settling on him like a lead cloak. "All the time. It could mean a future where humanity isn't just surviving but thriving. Maybe even alongside the Xynar. Or it could all go horribly wrong and we'll be remembered as the fools who tried to play gods. Better to be remembered as fools than forgotten nobodies," Jack said, a grin splitting his face. "Besides, I've always fancied being remembered, or infamous," Farah added, her smile a ghost of the defiance they'd shared in the tower. "Infamy has its perks," Savid agreed, "but let's aim for famous. I've heard it's less likely to get you shot." In the days that followed, the new normal settled over them like ash after a fire. They navigated the void, dodging Xynar patrols and sketchy spaceports, their lives a delicate dance on the knife's edge. Each system they passed through was another roll of the dice, the stakes too high to comprehend fully. The ship became their home, albeit a home with the charm of a tin can and the ambience of a funeral dirge. The air was stale, the food barely edible, and the company was, well, the company was the best part. Gallows humor kept them sane, the jokes and adhesive that held their fragile camaraderie together. One evening, or what passed for evening in a realm without sunsets, they gathered in the cramped mess room. It was barely large enough to fit the three of them, but they made do. The conversation drifted to tales of old escapades, each story more outlandish than the last. "Remember that time on Tanny's Roman 4? Jax asked, eyes twinkling with mirth. "How could I forget?" Farah replied, a fond smile tugging at her lips. "We nearly got eaten by the locals, and that was before dinner. Yeah, well, you've got to admit, their idea of hospitality is unique," Savid said, recalling the incident with a shiver. "Unique isn't the word I'd use," Jax cut in, snorting. "More like suicidal." "Hey, they did offer you a job," Farah teased. "Yeah, as dinner," Jax shot back, laughter spilling from him like a broken faucet. The laughter was a balm, soothing the edges of their shared anxiety. In these moments the walls seemed less oppressive, the future less daunting. Still, the reality loomed ever larger. The Xynar wouldn't forget or forgive. The escape had been an affront to their pride, a crack in their veneer of invincibility. It was only a matter of time before they came knocking, seeking retribution with a fervor only the wronged could summon. And then, as the clock ticked its relentless march forward, it happened. The comm system lit up, a message blinking with insistent urgency. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Savid moved to the console, his heart thudding in his chest as he punched in the command to play the message. The screen crackled, distorted by distance and interference before finally resolving into the face of Arcs. The Xynar's wet rodent appearance had never been more welcome, his expression a mix of relief and something else, something like respect. "Doctor," Kyron Arcs began, his voice a low rumble. "You've caused quite the stir. I trust you're aware of the consequences." "We're getting used to consequences," Savid replied, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards. "Good," Arcs said, nodding slightly, "because the Council is not pleased. Your actions have forced them to reconsider their policies, Jax interjected, eyebrow raised. "You mean their unwritten rule of kill first, ask questions never?" Arcs allowed a thin smile. "Something like that. They're beginning to see the value in negotiation." Savid folded his arms, skepticism etched across his features. "Negotiation? With us? They must be really desperate. Desperation can be a powerful motivator," Arcs replied smoothly. "They're not ready to concede defeat, but they're beginning to understand that you're not the enemy they thought. And what are we then?" Farah asked, her tone cautious. "An anomaly," Arcs said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "One that could prove beneficial if handled correctly." Savid exchanged glances with his crew, a flicker of hope igniting. This was unexpected, an olive branch from an enemy who'd rather crush them underfoot. Caution, however, would be their ally now. "What's the catch?" Savid asked, his voice carrying the weight of hard-learned mistrust. "No catch," Arcs replied. "Only an opportunity. The Council is willing to discuss a ceasefire, perhaps even a collaboration." The words hung in the air, heavy with potential. It was the kind of offer that could shift the balance, turn their ragtag band from fugitives into something more. But trust was a rare commodity, and Xynar promises were as slippery as the creatures themselves. "We'll think about it," Savid finally said, his tone noncommittal. "Of course," Arcs said, unfazed, "but don't take too long. The galaxy is not a patient place." With that, the transmission ended, leaving the trio to digest the implications. A ceasefire, collaboration. These were words that could mean salvation or another trap, depending on how they played their hand. "Looks like we've got a decision to make," Jax said, breaking the silence. Savid nodded, the weight of leadership settling on him once more. "Yeah, but whatever we do it together. The universe was a grand, indifferent expanse, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. But as the ship sailed through it, a small dot against the infinite, they were more than survivors. They were players in a game as old as time, a game of chance, wit, and defiance. And for now, that was enough.